David, appreciate you joining us today. I first heard you talk at the Foxwell Founders in-person event we were in San Diego, weren't we?
San
Yes,
Diego.
we were in San Diego. Was really fascinated by many things that you said. A couple of things like FOMO versus FOMU, which I definitely want to dive into, mergers, acquisitions. But before we get into all that, could you just share with listeners who aren't familiar with you or your previous experience with agencies, just a little bit of your background and what 3Q Digital was about?
Yeah, sure. I will try to give a 2-minute summary of
Yeah.
25 years. I started in digital marketing in 2000, working at a startup in Silicon Valley. At that company, I learned about Google advertising, which had just launched. And for the next, I guess, 7 years, I worked at a bunch of different startups in Silicon Valley, mainly focusing on Google advertising, a little bit of SEO, a little bit of other aspects of marketing. And then in 2008, I decided to start my own consulting firm. I basically just set up shop in a coffee shop in Pacifica, California. I was fortunate to have a pretty good network of people who knew that I did digital marketing, and I got a lot of inbound leads. So much so that I was able to start hiring people to take some of the excess demand. And over the next 4 or 5 years, I sort of transitioned the business from an SEM or Google advertising agency to a performance marketing agency. So we started hiring experts in Facebook advertising, SEO, analytics, so on and so forth. We sold the company in 2015 to a publicly traded company in Texas. We thought that was going to be the end of the road for us, but when we got to the earnout on that deal that they owed us, they weren't in a position to pay us what we were owed. So we ended up taking the company back private. A year later, we got interest from more acquirers to sell the business, and we took the company and sold it to a private equity consortium. And then a couple years after that, we sold the company again to a Dutch company called Dept. And so I stayed with the company in various capacities until about 2022-ish. And then I moved on, and today I'm doing consulting, helping people with M&A and with growth.
And if you don't mind me asking, I can always cut this from the recording if we need to. When you exited, what was the annual revenue of 3Q?
The first time we exited, our annual revenue was probably in the, I want to say, $18 million range, I think.
Okay.
Top
And
line.
what year was that in?
That was 2015.
Okay. Awesome. And then you ended up exiting, you said, a few more times, then finally you had a final buyout there.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I said, in 2015 we sold, and then in 2018 we were supposed to get paid all our money, and they didn't have it. So we bought the company back. We then sold in 2019 to two private equity companies. And then in 2022 is when we sold to the Dutch company.
Okay. And as you were growing, as you were expanding services, I know you mentioned multiple acquisitions as well, bringing companies in. As you expanded services, did you ever just focus on building out your own team, or did you mainly go after acquiring another agency that specialized in the specific service to bring in-house?
Almost always we built out our own team. We did make two acquisitions along the way. We made one in 2014, which was another local San Francisco company that we thought, sort of taking out some competition, basically. And then we acquired an SEO focused company in, I think, 2021. But most of our development into these other channels was by identifying an expert who could give us immediate credibility that we knew what we were doing, and then build around that expert, allow the expert to hire junior staff, build out whatever the expert thought made sense in terms of our software platforms and process documents.
So that's an interesting thing to touch on. You focused on hiring somebody that excelled in that area and then gave them, I don't want to say free reign, but you gave them free reign to build out the team, build out the processes, instead of being the founder that wanted to be an expert at everything, I guess, in lack of better terms, which is something I'll just call myself out. I transitioned from freelancing to building an agency. I struggled with quite a bit in the first couple of years, is just trying to stay up to date vigorously with all of the best practices for platforms and things like that. And it definitely slowed us down quite a bit growth wise.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's impossible to truly be an expert at many, many things.
Mhm.
I think I like the phrase "an expert at everything's an expert at nothing."
Yeah.
Um, I would say that in our case, also, our strength as a business was Google advertising and still
Okay.
is to this day. And so when we added these ancillary services, I guess we ultimately realized we didn't have to be the absolute best in the world at these ancillary services. We had to be sort of good enough. So, in other words, people were coming to us primarily because they said, manage my Google and Facebook advertising. And then all this other stuff was sort of secondary to that. And so the strategy that I often like to reference is what's called a moat strategy, which is like you figure out what your castle is as a business and you build a moat around it. And so our castle was Google and Facebook advertising. Our offerings of SEO and analytics and so on and so forth were all moats designed to protect the castle because as you may have experienced, as you scale your agency and you go after bigger clients often want one throat to choke. Even though you may be the best in the world at SEM, they don't want to manage 15 agencies. They'd rather manage, I mean, frankly, I think they'd rather manage one agency that's pretty good at 15 things than 15 agencies that are each good at one thing. So we didn't have to truly like sort of be like, I mean, at least I didn't have to be a world renowned SEO expert to offer SEO in my
Well,
perspective.
that's so interesting to hear because in my I'll call it ecosphere because in social media you have a bubble and you may see different stuff than I see and vice versa. With the specialized agencies, the agencies that do one thing and they try to do that very well, there is this common trend of saying like we want to be the best at this specific thing. We don't want to touch anything else because we want to provide our client the best service. And when you brought forward at the Foxwell Founders event, FOMO versus FOMU, it really kind of opened up perspective for me on that because I'll be honest, I've always been specialized agency mindset, but hearing how you angled FOMO versus FOMU to be able to get the bigger clients, because that is a struggle for the specialty agency to land the big whale clients that way. Maybe could you just dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, so FOMO is fear of missing out. Everyone knows that. And in the agency world, that sort of refers to working with a world renowned expert. It's you choose an SEO expert who everyone says is the best because you're worried that if you don't choose that expert, your competitors are going to get an advantage over you. And so this is most common with startups, companies in very, very competitive environments where they're like, I need the absolute best person to do this for me. And so I'm going to hire based on expertise and results without regard to anything else. FOMU stands for fear of messing up. And so when you get to bigger clients who have established themselves, billion-dollar businesses, whatever, they are more concerned about loss avoidance than they are about gain. So the example that I always give is if you were like managing Apple's campaigns, marketing campaigns, and let's say that your team does a great job, and quarter over quarter you grow their revenue by 20%, and people give you a pat on the back and say good job. But let's say that the next week, one of your creative people mistakenly uploads a display ad that gets the Apple branding entirely wrong. Um, you will get fired, and the person inside Apple will get fired as well. So the people who are working at Apple, they would rather choose a big agency where they're not going to mess up than they would work at a small agency that's experts, that's going to do a great job, but has the risk of not sort of following all their protocols and getting them in hot water. And so as you think about your agency, I mean, you have to sort of make this decision. Am I going to be a FOMO agency where it's like, whenever I get on a conversation with a potential client, they leave saying, wow, that guy knows so much about topics A, B, and C, I have to hire them. Or you could be a FOMU agency, which is when the CMO from a big company says, wow, this agency is one I can trust. And if they screw up, no one can blame me because I chose a big, safe agency. And it's totally different approach to how you work with clients and the expectations that clients set for you.
And from your perspective, there's the saying, the people that pay the least have the most complaints or have the most issues. But just from a perspective of like, the Apples, the blue chip companies versus startups, they each have their own intricacies. They each have their own positive and negative aspects or difficulties. Which one is harder from your perspective to work with, from just an organizational perspective and from a ongoing management perspective?
I think they're both hard in different ways. I'm not sure one is harder than the other. I mean, I will say that with startups or founder-led clients, small companies, you know, those kind of clients tend to be take up much more of your time, want to pay you less money, are often less savvy, and churn more frequently. So, it is very challenging to scale a business at charging law firms $1,500 a month and hoping to have someday 200 law firms that you can scale. I mean, it's very time consuming. Margins are low. Very frustrating. So, personally, I did that. That's how I started my agency. I took whatever client came my way. And over time, my personal decision was to sort of move to bigger clients because, like I said, there are challenges with big clients, and a lot of it is politics and a lot of perception. But big clients tend to be a little bit more laid back. So, having one client pay me $15,000 a month versus 10 clients pay me $1,500 a month, there's almost always going to be a lot less friction and a lot less, chasing windmills when you deal with the one client at 15K. As I said, you have to build in a level of professionalism to handle that. You need to have the accoutrements of a big agency. So that may mean having an office in a prime location. It may mean having consistent style templates for all your PowerPoints. It may be hiring senior people who maybe aren't necessarily experts at anything except for taking care of clients. Totally different, game. Both are hard, but yeah, I mean, personally for me, I felt like the only way to truly scale the business to a 50, 60, $100 million business was to increasingly go after the bigger clients and leave the smaller clients who can be a lot of fun to work with behind.
And I know you just mentioned some things, the office space, the templates, the top talent that way. All of those very important going towards bigger clients. But I'm curious, just from your experience, not saying it would be the same for every agency, although you might say it would be, chronologically, how did you make that transition? Because one thing that I think about sometimes is to be able to hire top talent for SEO and CRO and SEM and all these different services, you need to have the revenue to be able to foot that, which means you need to have the bigger client. So it's kind of like the chicken or the egg of like, which one comes first? And generally, I've always thought that hiring follows sales, but maybe there's some sort of in between or reverse there. What's your thoughts on like your pathway chronologically to transitioning from those smaller clients to the larger?
Yeah, I mean, I think revenue obviously is important in any business, but I would say in the early parts of the business, we sort of treated the business like a startup, and we pumped almost all of our profits back into the company. So if we decided that we needed an SEO service offering, we went out and we found an SEO expert. We made them an offer, which oftentimes we're talking about a $200,000 plus hire, especially in the Bay Area. And then we would assume that it's for the first 3 or 6 months that's going to be eating into our profits, but it's an investment we're willing to make. I think the other thing that's worth noting is when you're a 5-person agency and you decide I need to hire person X to do whatever service for me, you're literally increasing your payroll by 20%, assuming everyone gets paid the same amount. You're going from 5 people to 6 people. You're I guess it's actually like whatever 16%, but it's a huge investment at 5 people. When you get to 50 people and you need to hire that SEO expert, now you're talking about a 2% impact on revenue. And then you can keep going. When you're at 250 people, hiring a team of 5 or 10 people doesn't really impact your bottom line that much. So it is a bit of a chicken or the egg, but I think maybe the answer is in the early days, I mean, you know that you're going to be cutting into your profit and it's going to cost you. But as you scale, it becomes easier and easier to make these investments.
That's very true. Yeah, that is very true. I was a little bit nearsighted the way I was looking at that. No, that's true. And when you were building out pipeline, I know you said you started out, you were doing one service and you luckily had a network to be able to bring you leads in that way. What were some of the biggest pipeline or pathways for sales for you in your agency? Because I know hiring and sales seem to be the two things that most agencies harp on or look at when it comes to growth.
Yeah. I mean, so first of all, I think sales almost never works for agencies. everyone gets excited. They find some guy who's got 20 years of experience. They think they're going to bring them in and they're going to have a Rolodex and just bring clients in the door.
Mm.
I've almost never seen that happen. I've hired many,
Yeah.
many salespeople with lots of direct experience, and it just never drove the ROI that I expected. What has worked for us has been essentially networking with both with clients and with people who are ancillary to clients, such as venture capitalists, law firms, private equity companies, whatever. Um, and then thought leadership is the other thing. And so I have a theory that I call it triangulation, which is basically I set out to find a certain type of client, and I created a somewhat narrow definition of my ideal client. There's a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Branding, and one of their laws is that you can't be number one in a category. Create a category you can be number one in. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to create a category I can be number one in, which I'm going to be the number one performance marketing agency for Silicon Valley tech companies in the Bay Area. And so once I sort of established that definition of who I wanted to attract, everything I did, not everything I did, but a lot of what I did in the thought leadership and word of mouth referral perspective was driven around that area. So for example, I did every time there was a local conference on online marketing, I tried to speak at it. I tried to meet as many venture capitalists and private equity people in the Bay Area and just be a resource to them and let them know that, we're a great agency they should consider. We ran ads on NPR locally. We ran billboards on the highway between San Francisco and Silicon Valley. And so the effect of this was really some CMO is looking for a agency that's focused primarily on Google advertising. They talk to their VC, and the VC says, "Oh, you should work with 3Q Digital." And then they go to a conference and they see someone from 3Q Digital speaking. And then they're driving on the highway and they see our billboard, and they go to a message board, and they, so on and so forth. And it just gets to the point where it all starts to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, really, where everyone in the ecosystem says, "Oh, of course, 3Q Digital is the agency that you need to choose." We actually had this idea. I never really implemented it, but my tagline for 3Q was Silicon Valley's agency of record, which is kind of what we ended up becoming. So long story short, I think you can't achieve that through sales. You can't have a great salesperson that just goes around and knocks on doors and says, "Hey, you should try 3Q Digital." I think almost every agency and frankly, every professional services business, whether it's a lawyer, a doctor, a dentist, think about the professional services people that you talk to. You don't get a cold call from a dentist saying, "Hey, I'd like you to consider switching dentists." The only reason you go to a dentist is because your friend told you, "I like my dentist." And so that's the same approach that works in agencies.
Yeah, so it's a bit of like lead gen versus demand gen, or sales outreach versus demand gen, and building brand, building awareness, building credibility, finding the right people, networking. So you never saw success with cold email, cold outreach, LinkedIn DMs, those types of things?
I'll say a couple things. One is, if you want $1,500 a month clients, $2,000 a month clients, I think you can work with lead gen companies, and they will get you those clients.
Mm-hmm.
So that's possible. I did have some instances where, like, one story that I have is I was on LinkedIn and they had a feature called "People You May Know," and
Mm-hmm.
it said "People I May Know," and it was the director of marketing at Square. And so I just used one of my email credits and I said, "Hey, LinkedIn says we may know each other, or we should know each other. Would you be interested in getting a coffee?" And she wrote back and said, "Sure." And I went and met with her, and actually, like 3 weeks later, we closed them as a client, and we had them for like over a decade. And it was one of our biggest clients. So that kind of thing can happen, but the majority of our biggest clients, our absolute biggest clients, came from people calling me up who I've known for a decade, and I've always tried to be helpful to them, pay it forward, who said, "Hey, David, I just joined, mega company X, and I'd like you to work with us." There was no RFP, there was no salesperson involved. It was literally like, because of a connection and networking and building a community of good people that I liked, it turned into business.
Yeah, so compound growth. In the digital age, it is easy to try and get sucked into the quick wins and the overnight successes and those types of things. One last question on sales, and the answer may be no. I know you said the lower clients would generally go for cold outreach and stuff, but did you ever do any like contact marketing? So mailing phones and mailing like different things that interest people. Did you ever try that? Was it cold or was it warm? And what did that look like?
So we never tried that. I like that. I do like that concept. And as a, I guess, as a target, I remember American Express sent me like a 6 foot long remote control helicopter and said,
Yeah.
if you want to fly this thing and get the remote, you have to meet with us. And I thought that was pretty clever. But for the most part, no, we didn't. I mean, we did have an instance where we worked with a third party that said, hey, we can get you in touch with private equity companies. And we want to do an outreach campaign to private equity companies. And so I said, let's try it. And they did it, and they listed in their letter. They said, "Oh, 3Q has had tremendous success with private equity company A, B, C, and D." One of the companies they listed, it's true we had worked with them, but we had a bad outcome. And then they mailed this letter to that private equity company as part of their mail merge. And I got a call from the partner at this company, which is one of the top, let's say, 5 private equity companies in the world, who said, I understand that we had a bad experience with you and you are using us and using our name. Not only is it unauthorized, but it's not true that we're an advocate of you. So I had to do a lot of groveling just to make sure that that person didn't go back and tell 1,000 of their private equity friends. So I mean, I think that there's a role, I should say, I think there's a role for business development in an agency. And by business development, I mean people that when a lead comes in, the founder, especially as you scale your business, the founder should not be spending their time doing 10 sales calls a day. Getting established a successful business development person who knows how to knows enough about marketing to be pretty good at having the conversation and establish a level of expertise and shepherds that client through a process, I think is very valuable. But outreach from a cold outreach for the most part tends to drive lower quality, lower revenue leads. And it just was never a part of our growth strategy.
No, that makes sense. Well, that's good to know. Well, you do consulting now. You shared that you exited your agency, 18 million annual revenue for your agency when you exited it. So you're doing consulting now with agencies, helping them both with growth and then also with potentially exiting if they're ready to at that point. As you're working with an agencies, you've been in the agency world for decades now. What are the most common opportunities for agencies to tackle to be able to get past plateaus of growth that you see?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I should say that the first time we sold, we exited, we were at 18 million, but the next 2 times we were substantially higher than that. So
I remember the number. I just didn't want to say it because I
yeah,
didn't know if
yeah,
you're comfortable
it
saying
was a
it or
good,
not.
it was a bigger number, but
Yeah, with
um,
extra commas.
yeah, I think honestly, I mean, I think the thing that I always tell people is that staying top of mind with potential lead sources is probably the thing that agencies could do a better job of and have a lot of growth. What I find for myself personally is I get people all the time who write me and say, "Oh, I need an expert at, you know, Apple app advertising." And I
Mm-hmm.
have to go and think to myself, like, who do I know who knows something about Apple? And more often than not, it comes down to someone that I've spoken to in the last month. I'm like, oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that guy, he has an agency, he does this stuff. Um, so I tell people all the time, like, if you just reach out to 25 people a month, and it doesn't even have to be like a comprehensive, like, hey, I know this about you and that about you, and I thought this is a specific article that I saw you'd be interested in. If it just needs to be them remembering that you exist, you will see um, lead flow come to the door. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I've had a lunch with someone that I haven't seen in 6 months, and they haven't sent me any leads. We have the lunch. 24 hours later, I get 2 introductions from them. So, anyways, from a growth perspective, I think that's probably the number one thing that I think people take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay. And, you know, times have changed. I would say like ASC, iOS, many other acronyms that mean nothing to our friends and family, but are ingrained in our brains, change how we build operations and manage accounts. As we wrap up this call, I just kind of want to touch on that 2-letter acronym that everybody's talking about, AI, artificial intelligence. Do you think that agencies are here to stay? Do you think that there's going to be a massive turnaround with how agencies operate with AI, or do you think it's too early for that?
Well, first of all, I think that change takes longer than we think in most cases. Even though it seems like AI has only been around for 6 months and is going to take over the world, um, it's going to take quite a while for AI to truly replace everything that agencies do. That's number one. Number two is um, depending on what your agency does, um, there's a greater threat to your agency. So if what you're doing right now is you're offshoring creative to the Philippines and you're paying people $8 and then turning it around and charging people $15, that's not a sort of long lived opportunity. I think that's probably something that AI will take over. So there are some parts of the agency world that I think are already in existential crisis and should be, because AI can just do what they're doing better. But the third thing is, and I go back to what we talked about FOMO versus FOMU. We've all seen these stories of someone running an ad with creative that has like three hands, because
Mm-hmm.
the AI didn't quite get it right. And I think we're still at that stage with AI. AI is not at the level that a FOMU agency is going to depend on them.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if you're Apple and someone has three hands in your ad and it's an embarrassment to the Apple brand, that agency will be fired faster than you can say, there's an app for that. I mean,
Yeah.
you will be gone. So there's still a great need for both human fact checking and quality control and strategy and creativeness. And I think that agencies that sort of play in that world of strategy, profession, high level expertise, I think they've got a lot of room to go before they have to truly get worried about AI. That said, AI is probably the biggest existential threat to agencies that I've ever seen. So if there's 125,000 agencies in the U.S. right now, it would not shock me if 3 years from now that's down to 10,000, and those 10,000 are all going to be doing well for themselves. But for the other 115,000, yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean it creates that divide between expert and novice, and makes experts more needed or more valuable, and novices replaced that way. So, yeah, well, that's good to hear, David. I appreciate you jumping on today. For anybody that's listening, agency owner in agency operations that would like to connect with you after hearing this conversation, what's the best way for them to do that?
Best way is to go through my website. It's davidrodnitzky.com. There's a contact us form, and just fill it out, and we'll get in touch and see if we can work together.
Perfect, David. Well, I appreciate your time today. This was great.
Yeah, thanks, Colby. It was fun.